to the arrest of David A. Wiley Jr., date of birth 7/14/1978. Last night, Mr. Wiley was arraigned in the town of Albion court for the town of Kendall on 2 counts of reckless endangerment in the first degree and 2 counts of criminal negligent homicide. They relate to the deaths of Joan Gilman, date of birth 10/5/1979, age 38, and Richard Gilman Jr., 9/12/2003, 14 years of age. The basic allegations are that Mr. Wiley was operating a generator in a garage area under the living space where Ms. Gilman and her son, Richard Gilman Jr., were residing, resulting in high levels of carbon monoxide that ultimately resulted in their deaths. Mr. Wiley is scheduled to appear again in court this Monday night in the town of Kendall. And so we'll take any questions that you have regarding the situation.
Did Wiley know these 2 people?
Yes. The situation is that this property, there were 2 separate living units there with Ms. Gilman and her son living above the garage, and Mr. Wiley lived in a different part of the premises. He was the caretaker of the property for the landowner.
Do we think there was malicious intent here, or was it just a mistake?
We're not alleging that this was an intentional thing in any way, shape, or form. We're alleging, again, that this is a reckless or criminally negligent act.
Is he, you obviously talked to him. Is he apologetic about what happened?
Joining me today is Investigator Gifaldi and under Sheriff Chris Bork and Chief Deputy Mike Muley. I don't know if any of you want to speak to him.
Yes, during the interview he was very remorseful.
Did he explain why it came to that?
Well, Mr. Wiley was running a generator because the power had been shut off at the residence. The unfortunate part was he was only powering his side of the building. So the generator ran for 17 hours and he powered his side. And unfortunately, the levels reached a point of 4 to 5 times the limit in the body that would cause death to a person. So unfortunately, I believed, were hoping for the power to come back on at some point, but I don't believe that it did.
Can you move those mics closer?
Yeah,
We
that's
won't be able to hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
Really,
Sure.
even closer than that. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe.
So you're saying that he had power on the other side where he lived, but the power on their side was shut off?
It's my understanding that the power was shut off to the residence, the duplex. He had control of both electric bills. There were separate meters. When he fired up the generator inside the enclosed garage, he only powered his panel box.
How do we sort through, sorry, when it's, he doesn't own the building, a landlord does, but he's the caretaker. I mean, is that what maybe took a while to then charge him? I mean, who is ultimately responsible for? I thought if you own a home, you have to keep the power on, like it's never shut off when you have tenants there. Like, it just seems, I mean, how did you come about that?
Well, they each had
their
their own separate meters for the portion of the premises that they resided in, and both meters, as I understand it, were in the name of Mr. Wiley for one reason or another. Unfortunately, that power was turned off apparently for non-payment. He was trying to compensate for that with this generator, and that's what resulted in the carbon monoxide poisoning.
Do we know why he wasn't paying the bills? Because Gilman's family maintains she was making payments. I don't if it was to the landlord or to Wiley. Can you confirm or explain?
I don't know if.
I can't confirm that, but Mr. Wiley had the bills in his name and he was responsible for paying the bills. And obviously they didn't get paid, so at some point after April 15th, the power was turned off.
What is the caretaker? What
Well,
was the
he's
role there?
basically, he lives in the other half of the house, and he kind of watches out for things at the house, takes care of things for the property owner.
Is the landlord local and will he be charged?
My understanding is that the landlord lives in the Albion area, is that correct? And we are not looking at charges for him at this point.
Do we know how long the caretaker had been in charge of this house? Had he been taking care of it for quite some time?
I don't know the answer.
I don't know.
You're not caretaker for any other properties in the area?
I'm not aware of any.
Was the power upstairs above the garage turned off? Or was the power still, or was the entire premises turned off, or do we have any idea on that?
Whole house, you said, already?
Right.
Yeah.
A duplex, a meter for each side. Power was turned off for both accounts.
So for both accounts, he didn't pay, not just
Right,
one
that's
account?
correct.
Okay.
Undersheriff, can you help, the community, so upset, this young mom, single mom, busting her butt at her job, trying to make a living to provide for her son, who seemed like a very special kid. I don't know, what, can you say to the community in general, or in speaking to Gilman's relatives, just anything you can sort of share to?
Well, it's an absolute tragedy that didn't have to happen. You had what I would call a gross negligence with regard to operating that generator inside of a garage, which is not what an ordinary person, a prudent person, would do. So the levels reached the point where, they couldn't survive. It's not to say that they stayed in that bedroom for 17 hours, but they were probably in and out of the rooms in that upstairs apartment. And that particular day, the levels reached a point where it caused their death. So it didn't have to happen. You could have operated the generator outside. You could have maybe called for one of the agencies to help you get the power turned back on. Didn't have to happen. Shouldn't have happened.
You said he was very remorseful. Did he give any kind of indication of what was going through his mind at the time when he did this?
No, he just stated to me he was trying to keep power on at his side of the residence. He has a younger daughter. Just trying to keep some power on for her.
Was she there too? She lived there too?
Yes, she did.
Mr. District Attorney or Undersheriff, at any time was Mr. Wiley or his daughter, did they ever get sick?
Well, if you see the layout of the properties, where this generator was running was directly underneath the living quarters of Mrs. Gilman and her son. The area where Mr. Wiley was occupying the premises with his family is kind of set apart from that, so they would not have been subjected to the carbon monoxide.
Can you explain why what he did is a crime? Or what he's alleged to have done is a crime?
There's different levels of culpability in criminal activity, some of which, of course, is intentional. But it can also be criminal activity if you're negligent, criminally negligent is defined under the penal law, or if your reckless conduct rises to a certain level, it's recognized under the criminal law as being a crime as well. So again, we're not alleging that he intentionally went out to kill the victims here, but we are alleging that his reckless and criminally negligent conduct was of such a gross level that it constituted a violation of our penal law.
Did the caretaker rig the power source and still collect money? Do we know that?
When you say collect money, you mean in terms of rent? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
rig the power source?
When you say rigged, what we're alleging occurred is that he did set power to the panel box at the residence from the generator in order to activate the power within a portion of the premises.
Did he post bail, do you know?
Not yet that we're aware of. Bail was set at $2,500 cash, $5,000 bond in the town of Eldon.
The town stickers are still up, no occupancy, no one's allowed in there, is that correct?
Right. Code enforcement responded to the scene, Kendall, town, code enforcement, and they red flagged the property, so nobody should be living there at this point until,
And the dog either, so we got the dog out.
yeah.
I had called the animal control, they left the dog behind.
You know, any idea on how long he had been using the generator in this house?
3 days?
I believe based on our investigation, we determined approximately 17 hours.
Kind of punishment does this charge bring, potentially?
A reckless endangerment in the first degree is a D felony, for which you could receive a maximum of 2 1/3 to 7 years. A criminally negligent homicide is an E felony, for which you can receive a maximum of 1 1/3 to 4 years.
Where's his daughter now if that house is still condemned?
I don't know.
Is there any, thing you wanna say to the public as far as the dangers, of doing something like this?
You know, it's pretty apparent, and there's certainly warning labels on equipment. We all grow up being educated from the time we're in elementary school that you know, you don't run combustible engines within a living area for obvious and many different reasons. Of course, they can create a fire, and they can also create these very deadly situations like we have in this case. And as you know, carbon monoxide is a silent killer. Unfortunately, Ms. Gilman went to bed that night, I'm sure never expecting that she wouldn't be waking up in the morning. Fortunately, now we're past, at least it seems that we're past the heating season, and perhaps these things won't happen again. But people have to be very aware when they operate equipment in these closed type of spaces as to what the consequences can be.
Did he say he was aware of any, I mean, this is common sense, it would seem, that you wouldn't do that. I don't understand why he did it if this is such a common thing that you wouldn't do. Why would he do that?
And therein lies why we feel that this is criminal in nature. It is such an obvious thing, as you point out, and it's such a bad use of judgment, such a reckless and criminally negligent use of judgment that it's resulted in being charged as he has been.
Were there any disagreements between him and the family at all for, you know, issues with electric payments or maybe?
Not that I'm aware of, and not that we have any belief play into this situation at all. It just simply that they weren't paid, the power was turned off, and he tried to compensate in an appropriate way.
He was arraigned last night. When was he actually arrested? Last night as well?
Yes.
Was he expecting this, or what was his reaction when you came to take him away?
He voluntarily turned himself in a little after 6 p.m. last night.
Okay, anything else? Well, thank you. Again, this is Under Sheriff Chris Bork. On my far right is Investigator Jeff Gifaldi. Seated to me on my immediate right is our Chief Deputy Mike Neely, and I'm Joseph Cardone, the District Attorney. Thank you.
Thank you.